Hey mamas, welcome to Breastfeeding Relief with Bethany. We share incredible stories, tips, and breastfeeding ideas to help on your journey. I'm your host, Bethany Laverne, a lactation consultant and speech therapist who helps mamas with breastfeeding. Not all breastfeeding stories are the same, and we dive into those topics. Welcome to another episode of Breastfeeding Relief with Bethany. I am so excited to have Petra on with us today. She is also a doula, so we're going to speak about all things doula today as well. Welcome to the show. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. We finally are recording this episode with all of life's things that happened. We're getting around to it. I'm so excited because I have 4 breastfeeding journeys. So I am a birth doula, like you already said. I do also postpartum doula. I am a birth educator, and in-person clients, I do like placenta encapsulation stuff. So I am a mom of 4, and I actually had 3 cesareans before I had a vaginal birth. So that kind of threw me into becoming a doula. And I am just obsessed with all things birth and supporting women in person and virtually. So I could talk about it all day long.
Sure. I feel like we kind of jump into this field together, and we can just talk about this all day. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, clearly you have 4 kids, and so you have 4 different journeys. And since I know you a little bit, let's start with your first journey, because you were a teen mom. So why don't we start with that journey?
Definitely. So, yeah, I actually became pregnant, not planned, when I was 16, and I had my daughter a month before I turned 17. I definitely did not educate myself at all. I just figured my body would know what to do, and I would know what to do when the time came, when it came to breastfeeding. And that was just definitely not the case. So my labor was deemed failure to progress, and I ended up with a cesarean. And that made things a whole lot worse. It was just so hard to not only heal from this major abdominal surgery, but now I was expected to take care of this child, being a child myself, and then breastfeeding. So they gave me my baby afterwards and were like, okay, you can try breastfeeding. And I was like, I don't even know where to start. And I do remember the nurse like kind of tried to help the baby latch on, my nipple, and it was just like not happening. She kept like biting my nipple, and I was so like drugged up from the cesarean that I felt like I was in a fog. Like it didn't feel like reality. I just was like sitting there like I don't even know what to do. So we continued to try. And when I was released from the hospital, we went home, and I lived with my daughter's father's parents at the time. And my mother-in-law was like, well, I didn't breastfeed. So, formula's great. And so I had no support there. And my mom was like 45 minutes away. And so it was really hard. I felt very lonely. I was literally left alone. Her father was, he liked to party and stuff. So I was literally like home alone all the time with this baby and trying to figure it out. And it was really hard because I would be crying, she would be crying. And so we tried for like 3 weeks. I mean, I tried round the clock. I tried latching her on, and, my nipples would bleed. And I was just in so much pain, not only from that, but from my surgery, healing from my surgery. Like I literally couldn't even sit myself up. I had to have somebody like push me to a seated position if I was laying down. So it was just really difficult. And after a while, after people kept telling me, just do formula, I gave in and was like, okay, we're going to do formula. And then, after that, it did feel like I had less anxiety because I had lots of anxiety and stress, and I was crying all the time. And, I felt like a failure because I didn't give birth vaginally, and then I couldn't, breastfeed my baby. So I was like, the 2 functions that a woman can only do, I am not able to do them. So it was really, really discouraging. And I just didn't even know. I was depressed. I was very depressed after that. I went through lots of different hormonal shifts, and I had no support. So that made it even harder.
Yeah, I can't imagine not having any support around me. But do you feel like it was maybe worse because you were a teen mom? Because I feel like we judge teen moms so harshly that everyone just kind of set you up for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, part of it honestly was my fault because I actually intentionally secluded myself from people because I was embarrassed.
Sure.
I was embarrassed that I became pregnant as a teenager. None of my friends were even, doing that kind of stuff. And so I was ashamed. And yeah, my family also, they were not supportive. Some of them actually told me I should have an abortion when
Mhm.
I was pregnant. So that was like, yeah, I felt a lot of shame as a teen mom. I feel like if I were in my 20s, it would have been different, but it was not. It was horrible. And I feel bad even saying that because I love my daughter, like,
Mhm.
and we have such a great relationship. She's almost 19 now, which is so weird to say. Um, and she's amazing, but it was really a really rough journey in the beginning. And I do feel like a lot of it was attributed to me being a teen mom.
Sure. And as a teenager, you're thinking about getting a high school diploma. You aren't
Hmm.
thinking about researching,
Yeah.
looking up a birth plan or breastfeeding or anything like that. And if no one's encouraging, like, hey, pick up this book or let's go to this class together, you aren't setting yourself up for success. Like you even, are talking to moms in their 20s and 30s, and they even say, oh, I didn't even take a breastfeeding class. Or, I've had some friends recently, oh, I want a all natural vaginal delivery. And yet they haven't researched anything about it. They don't have a birth plan. And they come out with these traumatic horror stories because we more care about how pretty our nurseries are.
Yeah, I know. And it's really unfortunate because breastfeeding can be, I mean, it's a huge part of your postpartum.
Absolutely.
Um, I definitely was encouraged in the hospital to breastfeed, but after I was discharged after those 2 days, like I didn't have any,
Mhm.
like, oh, here's a referral to go see a lactation consultant. There was nothing like that. So, I just feel like there was no offering and I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know what to ask for.
Sure.
I was a child having a child. So, yeah. And I think about it now, think about like imagining my daughter having a child at that
Mhm.
age. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the
Mhm.
mental capacity is not completely there. But once I did have my daughter, it was like a switch flipped and I was all of a sudden just like this most responsible and so I had a child. I kind of
Mhm.
had to be and her father did not have the
Mhm.
same reaction after she was born. So I really had to step up my game. And
Mhm.
so I did actually graduate high school 3 months after I had her. So that was, yeah, there was a lot that I was doing at that time. It was crazy.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. You bring up some really good advice. I didn't know what to ask for. And so, mamas, I want to let you know I am here to support you. And I offer that one on one support to ask those questions that you're like, this might be a silly question. I don't want to ask my mom, or I'm not getting support from, my baby's daddy or the parents or my husband, right? Like even my mother-in-law, she used formula for all of her kids, and that's completely fine. So, I never ask her any breastfeeding questions because she'd be like, "Can I just go out and buy formula when he's at our house?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm also going to be here, and then I can't get clogged ducts, and I don't want to just bring my pump the whole time so you can feed my baby a bottle, right?" So I want to support you mamas. And so I offer 30 days of lactation support where you can contact me through an app. You can send me all your questions, especially at 2 and 4 a.m., because that's when we're sitting awake, lonely the most, having all the questions, second guessing everything on Dr. Google. And instead, just send me a message and I will send you back something in 24 hours or less with research or a good blog or a tip or a product to help you be successful on your breastfeeding journey for as long as you want to be.
I love that. That's such a great resource. I wish I had that.
So after your first baby, I want to say I assume you maybe did some more research before you had your second baby. So why don't we dive into what your second breastfeeding journey was like?
Absolutely. So I did end up having my second daughter with my husband, who is now my husband. He was so supportive of everything that I wanted to do, which is kind of wait a little bit to have another baby because I didn't feel mentally prepared for that yet. So we did, my daughters, I have three daughters. So my second daughter, she's 10 years younger than my first daughter. So I did feel way more prepared that time. But I wasn't anticipating having a slight complication, which was a placenta previa.
Ooh.
So my placenta was actually partially covering my cervix. Just like a little tidbit. I later found out it did move, but my doctor never told me. So instead of letting me know that, they never told me. So I was just scheduled for a second C-section. So I did end up having another C-section with my second. So I felt very much more prepared. Like I got the breast pump beforehand. I learned like different nursing positions and kind of like practice before I even had her how to latch. And they even told me like, which is crazy. I think about it now, like, thanks for the advice, not, but they said, you're probably not going to be successful in breastfeeding your daughter because she's going to be, because I had to have a C-section. Well, I didn't have to, but I thought I had to have a C-section at 36 weeks.
Oh.
So they were like, she's going to be really small. Her mouth's going to be small. We just don't put a lot of emphasis on breastfeeding. And I was like, well, thanks. Thanks for that. And so I actually did reach out to a lactation consultant before I gave birth. And they said, okay, that's great. We'll schedule something once you give birth and then we'll start like helping you. And so I did have the C-section and it was really tough because after the C-section, she was really small. She was like 5 pounds and very sleepy. And it was also from the C-section too. She was just really, really sleepy. And so we really tried. I would feed her, I would pump, I would use the haka. I put the haka on my opposite breast as I was nursing her so I could catch whatever dripped out. And so we did that for about 4 months. And I did see a lactation consultant. It was like at first every other day, and then it was once a week. And it was just, for whatever reason, so hard. And I was so mentally exhausted from that I pumped what I could from then on out because my nipples were bleeding all the time and then they would scab and then they'd open. It was horrendous. Like I was so stressed out and the lactation consultant's like, I don't know why this isn't working. Typically it works by now. And she wasn't gaining very much weight. And so I did end up doing like formula and breast milk, as much breast milk as I could pump, which wasn't very much for whatever reason. It was only like maybe 30 to 60 milliliters, like ever. It never was more than that the whole time that I did it. And, I know now that not everybody's body reacts to the stimulus of a pump the same way. Some people don't even react to it at all, just because obviously, it's not the same. It's not the same. So, yeah, we did that for about 4 months and I was just, I was at work. I was working. I went back at like 8 or 10 weeks. And it was just, I was a school bus driver. So it was not very easy to like, okay, I got to stop and pump real quick, So yeah, my body was just like all over the place. And it was just, I had people watching her and they were like, we don't have enough milk for her. So I gave her a formula and then she just really got used to like the bottle and formula. And then after a while, she actually wouldn't like really drink my milk. Sometimes she would like throw it up, like she was disgusted with it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I felt so offended. But, that's just what it was. I think she just got used to the formula taste and probably the flow too of how she was fed. And so she was just liked it better. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to stress myself out over this anymore. And so 4 months and I just stopped. I stopped pumping or trying to nurse anymore. So that was hard because then I was like, I'm a failure. But then I tried to celebrate like as long as I was able to actually do that. And then I just kind of moved on.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I want to bring up, you said
more than likely she got used to the bottle. And I would agree with that 100%. And the flow of bottles, your nipple never increases the flow. Like it'll never go from like, we started out slow and now we're on fast mode. Like that doesn't happen. It's the same pace every time. And so when we start giving our babies bottle, you can always give a breastfed baby an extra slow flow and they will be absolutely fine with that. You never need to turn up the speed of a bottle for a breastfed baby. So if they do get the speed turned up, right, to like fast flow, then they don't like breastfeeding anymore, mamas, because they're going to be like, this is so slow. And then also if you aren't pace feeding your baby, because our breasts aren't constantly releasing that milk, then they think, oh, it's stopped. And so then they pop off and they get fussy and they're really upset. And so you really need to learn how to teach your baby how to pace feed with a bottle, which is not usually taught, especially if they're with grandparents or, in daycares, because we have like 5 kids we need to feed and they're all crying. And so it's kind of like an assembly line and we don't have time to do all of that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, like I was very much about paced feeding, and I would tell, because my in-laws helped a lot, and I would tell them like, please, and it just, yeah, it did not. They would just do the typical lay baby down and give baby a bottle. Like, well, she's so hungry. And I was like, she's totally fine, like doing the paced, and then yeah, it didn't work out that way. So it is what it is,
Right.
So, I mean, she's happy. She's almost 9 now, and she is like, you would never know she was that small. She's like taller than everybody in her class and everything. She's so sweet. So going on to my next baby, so we decided to have our third, and it was about 4 years after that. And I was like, absolutely, we're gonna go for this breastfeeding. Like I was so gung-ho. I bought all the things like the haka, and just like milk collectors, and I planned like for my postpartum on how I could pump with work and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I ended up with another C-section, just because a lot of the like fear mongering that I went through, I was like, they were telling me it's so not safe to even try for like a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean, because you've had 2 C-sections. And instead of like doing my research, I just believed them, and ended up having a scheduled repeat C-section at 39 weeks. And everything was great. Like my baby was great. And afterwards, though, it was the same thing. I was so drugged up. And it's crazy because I remember laying on the table after baby came out, and I remember looking over at the anesthesiologist, and he was just pushing something into my IV. Didn't say anything, but after I saw him pushing the fluids into my IV, all of a sudden I was looking around like, whoa, everything just got real fuzzy. I feel like I'm in a dream. I felt like I was like high, like on drugs or something. And I was like, whatever you just did, like it really made me loopy. He's like, oh yeah, I just gave you, I think it was morphine. He's like, I just gave you a little morphine. And I was like, what? Why wouldn't somebody, like afterwards, I didn't think about it then, but afterwards I was like, why wouldn't he ask or say something before that? Because I was totally fine. I was so alert. I was so like involved in what was happening. And after he pushed that into my IV, I was like, not even there. I just felt so weak and weird. And then into the recovery room, I immediately was like, give her to me. Like, I want to latch her. I want to breastfeed her immediately. We did. She had a great latch, and I knew what to do because I looked up videos beforehand, like how to try to get a perfect latch. So I was like on it. And we actually had an incredible breastfeeding journey. So she was great with latching. We nursed. I pumped while I was nursing because I wanted to get used to the pump before I had to go back to work, because I did have to go back to work at like 10 weeks postpartum. So which was actually fine. I never had gotten like an oversupply. I never had like engorgement or anything like that. Wasn't great. yeah, so I went back to work and it was still great. We were still latching. Every time I seen her, she would just latch immediately. We did lots of skin to skin. I feel like that really helped. And I did feel like she was like constantly on the breast, but that is typically normal. And I feel like that was something that helped us be as successful and nurse as long as we did, because I actually nursed her until she was about 13 months old. So that was an incredible journey. I was not expecting that. And she actually weaned herself. I never like actively tried to wean her. Just all of a sudden she was like done. And it was fine. I felt very like satisfied and at peace with that breastfeeding journey. Yeah, it was great.
I love that your third journey was so much different. I love that. So, yeah, I definitely say, mamas, do your research. We feel like it should be natural and easy. Thank you, Instagram.
Mhm.
And those first few months sometimes aren't natural, and especially that first day. And then you just feel like you aren't giving your baby enough. And especially if you're just going to exclusively pump, like at first you just get that colostrum. It's like thick, it's dark yellow, and you're like, this isn't what's on Instagram. This isn't all these 5-ounce bottles that are being held up, right?
Yeah.
And so it's okay. That's what they're supposed to be getting until your milk comes in. And I remember being so nervous. I don't think my milk's come in. I don't think, like, I kept worrying about it. And mine came in on day 5. And I remember being like, oh, yep, we are in. Okay. There was nothing to be worried about. Like, it definitely dropped,
Oh yeah, you definitely know. And that's true what you said. We see these big, huge bottles and milk stashes on Instagram, and you
Mhm.
think, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong
Right.
that mine isn't that way? And that's one thing that I really have to emphasize with my clients, my birth
Mhm.
clients,
Mhm.
because they think that they should be pumping an extreme amount. So when they're pumping like a normal amount,
Mhm.
they're like, this is too little. My baby's not going to get enough. And it's like, oh no, like I hate that. Oh my gosh, it's so sad.
Mhm. Yeah. I know, especially with our first son, for some reason I had done a bottle one day. I had like pumped and done a bottle, I think because we were preparing to go on like a vacation without him. And so I was trying to really make sure he could take the bottle. And I just felt like he was hungry. And I remember going from like 2 ounces to 3 ounces. And he ended up getting too much that he like choked and he aspirated on it, which meant like it went into his lungs. He kind of turned purple. And I remember turning him over and like hanging him on the back. I was home by myself. I'm panicking, thinking, oh my gosh, I need to call 911. My son's not breathing. So then I took him into the doctor, and the doctor's like, why did you go from 2 to 3 ounces? And I was like, I don't know. He seemed hungry. He goes, no, a breastfed baby, you like up it by half an ounce, a fourth an ounce. Like you like double, like not, it was almost like doubled, I guess, like his stomach capacity. He was like, you overfed him and it had to go somewhere. So it decided to come on up. And, but as a new mom, that's super scary. And so really what you are making, usually moms, right, is more than enough. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And so with my fourth baby, I actually planned for a vaginal birth, which is
Mhm.
like it's becoming more mainstream, but at that time it wasn't really.
Sure.
Because I had 3 C-sections already, but I had a 2-year-old and I was like, I do not want to have a major surgery and chase around my 2-year-old.
Mhm.
So I planned for a vaginal birth and I achieved it after doing all the mindset work and all the things. And so actually, this breastfeeding journey is still going, and my son is about to be 2 years old. And he doesn't breastfeed like all the time now. It's just
Mhm.
like a couple times a day, if that, mostly naps or nighttime. But it was so much easier after
Mhm.
I gave birth, because immediately he was put on my
Mhm.
chest and immediately I was in this like it was like I was in a euphoric state,
Mhm.
and I could just feel all the hormones fusing through me, and immediately he latched, and it was perfect. Like he had a perfect latch, and I had no issues. Like, I remember the lactation consultant called and was like, "Do you need help?" And I was like, "I'm so good. Like, this is the only time I've ever felt like I had it in the bag." And I did like prepare. I also watched like all the videos on latching. I actually just like practice. I had like a boppy just in case, which I never actually really used it. We actually had great positions on like whenever we were nursing. So, it was incredible. Like, it's been the best journey. And now I'm actually like trying to wean him and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that because now I feel like I'm kind of over it.
Yeah. Mommy wants her body back.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us one piece of advice you would give to moms about breastfeeding?
Oh my gosh. Do your research,
Mm.
get some education, talk to Bethany. She is like a world of information. But seriously, like watch some videos on YouTube, if that feels like it helps you, talk to like a lactation counselor, lactation consultant, somebody that specializes in lactation so you can prepare before you give birth, because I feel like that is the key time. It's not the best time to try to figure it out once baby's here, because there's going to be a lot of other things that are happening. Your body's healing. You're trying to figure out your routine, if you can call it a routine. So beforehand, definitely do that.
Yeah, I agree. And then even afterwards, I feel like you still need support. At least I felt like I needed support. And there's so many free lactation groups, La Leche groups. Just Google them. There's a ton in your area and you will meet some other amazing moms. And most of them also, you can do a free weighted feed at them, which is also so lovely. I know I always felt like, is he getting enough weight? I wrote so many weights down for my first kid. My second kid, I'm like, you're fine.
Yep.
So what would you say is your favorite breastfeeding product?
I would have to say the Haka.
Okay.
I absolutely love that, just because I would always just put it on my breast that I wasn't breastfeeding on. And I actually created like a small stash of milk from collecting from the Haka. So I didn't even have to actively really pump, which was incredible. So that would be my favorite.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect. And for mamas that don't know with that, it is not considered a pump. It's just supposed to collect your milk, which is so lovely. And also don't feel like you need to fill the whole thing full, because you can fill it full with 5 ounces. Sometimes I would just have like a few drops, and sometimes I could have like first thing in the morning, I could fill it with like 2 ounces while he was like nursing on the other side. So don't feel like you're going to fill it full, because I always felt like I was a failure, that it wasn't filling full, but I was also breastfeeding too. So of course it shouldn't be filling, because you need enough milk for your baby.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on today. I want mamas to know how they can connect with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I love talking about this. I don't think it's talked about enough. So I am on Instagram at Birthing Come True. And then I do have a website. It's birthingcometrue.com. And either way, you can get a hold of me. I am most active on Instagram. And then if you are in the Modesto, California area, I do in-person birth doula support, placenta encapsulation, postpartum doula support, and birth education.
You forgot about your podcast.
Oh my gosh, I have a podcast too. So it was called the Birth Junkie Podcast, but I actually rebranded because VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, is very near and dear to my heart. So now it is called the VBAC Junkie Podcast, and it is all things VBAC, birth stories, tips from like professionals. Like I have a couple of like home birth OBGYNs that I got to interview, which is very cool. So yeah, join me on there too. Take a listen and let me know what you think.
Yeah, and you can also hear my birth story on there with our 2 boys. So I will also link that in the show notes if anyone here wants to hear about my birth story. So
Yay!
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. We super appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you loved this episode, it would mean so much if you would share it with another mama or post on social media and tag me. I want to personally thank you for wanting to help other mamas. You got this. I'm rooting for your breastfeeding journey.